start with our first two verses that we always do. You guys read with me? For the word of God is living and active, sharper than any two-edged sword, piercing to the division of soul and of spirit, of joints and of marrow, and discerning the thoughts and intentions of the heart. That's Hebrews 4:12. 2 Timothy 3:16 says, all Scripture is inspired by God and is profitable for teaching, for reproof, for correction, and for instruction in righteousness. The original plan for this morning was to finish our series called Mind Games. However, I feel it's necessary to postpone our regularly scheduled broadcast and bring you something that's just a little bit different this morning. And really kind of talk about the truth of what is going on in the Middle East. And I'm going to get into why that's important. But last Sunday, obviously, during our prophecy post, we touched on the prophetic implications, a little bit of what took place at 6:31 a.m. on October 7th in southern Israel. As Hamas terrorists breached the border wall and they began to slaughter Israeli military personnel, police officers who were completely caught off guard, and also they murdered more than 1,300 civilians, including women, children, and even babies. They wounded more than 3,300 people in this attack and in rocket attacks that they perpetrated against Israel, and they have more than 150 hostages. So what I want to start with today is this verse. For our fight is not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, and against spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. If you're anything like me, I'm shocked, I'm disgusted, really just can't quite get my head around the heinous acts that we saw take place as a leader. They're just absolutely horrible. When you see seasoned soldiers and people who are first responders to places like earthquakes, and politicians who have seen, who knows, all kind of brought to tears by the things that they saw, seen, and they're not even able to speak of them. They are without words in trying to explain, what is taking place. These war crimes that we've seen take place and that have come, in full open view of what we've been able to look at, they're evil. There's nothing there, and they're obviously demonic. They are from Satan's demons that we know are working against God's chosen nation, Israel, and the Jewish people. We know that is exactly what's taking place here. And this is not the first time that we have seen this spirit. Okay, historically, we saw the Assyrian Empire, the Babylonian Empire, the Seleucid Empire. We've seen Rome. We've seen medieval Europe. We've seen the Ottomans. We've seen Nazi Germany and Russia, all consumed by the same spirit of hate as they tried to eliminate the Jews. All of those nations that at one point throughout history tried to eliminate the Jewish nation and destroy it. And today it's no different. Most of the world is listening to Satan, the father of lies, because God has chosen Israel. He has chosen them as his people. And so Satan is trying to wipe them off the earth and has so repeatedly over history to overthrow God's sovereignty. That's what this is all about. And until 8 days ago, it would be hard for us to imagine that Israel would again, in modern era, be in this position, the same position that Satan is trying to wipe them off the face of the earth. They say, well, it was just a small attack in the southern part of Israel. No, I'm going to explain to you why this is a much bigger issue. I'm going to show you scriptural proof for it. So let's look at verse number 4. I am going to make Jerusalem a cup of reeling before all the surrounding nations. And when there is a siege against Judah, it is also against Jerusalem. And it will be on that day that I will set Jerusalem as a weighty stone to all the peoples. All who carry it will surely dash themselves, and all the nations of the land will be gathered against it. I want to talk to you this morning about what we're going to witness. Not what we might witness, what we are going to witness. Satan's siege of Israel is a public relations nightmare for him. Okay? Most of the civilized world, thank goodness, is having a major reaction against it. Most. Not all. We've seen some crazy folks out there who are celebrating this, and even in the United States and Canada and England and Spain. I mean, there are some people who are definitely falling to Satan's deception. And even though there's a desensitization, especially to the younger generation, because they've been playing violent video games their entire life and watching movies on TV that glorify violence, there has still been a backlash that I don't even think Satan was ready for. But we see that this violent behavior of Hamas is repeated, and I don't mean to be graphic, but I think we need to understand, if you haven't seen what took place, you need to understand what took place. And violent, repeated sexual assaults, killing innocent hostages, shooting children in front of their parents, and shooting parents in front of their children, executing children, beheading babies. It is the most sick, heinous thing I have ever read about, seen pictures of, or ever thought would take place in this world. These demonically driven Hamas terrorists videotape themselves participating in this behavior, and they posted it on social media. Now they're denying it today. Well, that wasn't us. It was a bunch of Gaza civilians that came in the fence with us. We didn't do it, except they gloried in it. They posted it for our world to see. Men in uniform, in Hamas uniforms, doing these very things that I've talked about this morning. So Hamas has received this unexpected backlash. But wait, the enemy has always got a contingency plan. Right? He always has a way. He always has things that he can throw out there that have worked for centuries. They've worked for centuries. And we've already seen those things start. I mean, I don't know if you've been on social media at all, but you start to see documentaries that are replayed from years ago that talk about this horrible 16-year siege that Israel has laid upon Gaza, where it has been occupied by the horrible Zionist enemy and caused the problems that all of the Palestinians within Gaza are now under. We've already seen that start to talk. We've seen interviews of bewildered Gaza citizens who are in shock and have lost people and are blaming everything that is taking place on Israel. Yeah, we've seen the UN already condemn this. We've seen certain countries already condemn this. We've seen certain people already calling for, stop the violence, stop the violence. The public opinion is beginning to waver, even today, from Israel's right to defend itself to the Palestinians are the victims and Israel is the aggressor. These are the things that are already happening on broadcast news. Relief agencies are starting to already claim genocide. Okay? I don't think they know that. I don't think they understand the definition of the word. Genocide is not where you, before you blow up a building, you send a text message, an SEN message to everybody that you already know are living there saying, get back out. And that's not genocide. They don't know the definition of genocide. I mean, you're going to see an all-out effort to blame shift. We talked about blame shifting last week. We're going to see an all-out effort to blame shift the horror of what we saw take place last week by Hamas terrorists, satanic murderers, and even Hezbollah in the north has already started to escalate this thing to the victim in this, which is Israel. You're going to see that blame shifting take place, just as it's been done over and over and over and again for centuries. When Rome did it, Germany did it, and listen, I want everybody to understand we have a biblical mandate as Christians to stand up for Israel. Right? We have that biblical mandate. That is in our Bible for us to do that. Jesus Christ himself said, salvation is of the Jews. We have our very salvation. We have them to thank for our very salvation. But I want to support them, not just with blind faith. because the Bible tells me to, but I want us to support them because of facts. And I want you to be aware, if you're not aware of the facts, and why you should support them because of the facts. You're going to have people that are going to talk to you, friends who are going to change their tune, even if they think this is a terrible thing, they're going to change their tune in the future. They're not Christians, they will absolutely change their tune. And what we are seeing is a test of how the Antichrist will be able, by his communication system, rule this earth. How he will be able to make the great deception easy for everybody to understand. So if you're unaware of the facts, we want to talk about the true situation between Israel and Gaza. All right, we got to go back. 1917. There was a declaration called the Balfour Declaration, which during World War I, still in the middle of World War I, and an ambassador to Palestine, wrote a letter back to Britain. It's called the Balfour Declaration. It says, you know what we should do? When this is all over, you know what we should do? We should allow a homeland for the Jews. We should provide a space when all of this is over for the Jewish nation to exist again somewhere within their homeland. Okay, that's called the Balfour Declaration, 1917. Basically, it suggested a national home for Israel. Now, nothing happened for a while. Everybody, the war had to be won, which it was. And so this new home was suggested in the land that was at that particular time called by the British Palestine. Okay, there's a region that was named Palestine. There was never any Palestine way back in history. This only started when the British, invaded and took the thing over. It was all Palestine was a part of the Ottoman Empire, which was one of the Axis powers that lost World War I. When the Allies won, the Ottoman Empire was divided. It was broken apart, and they made, a whole bunch of Arabs running around and, a very small population of Jews. It really wasn't a good possibility that nations would be formed in this vast area. So the Allies put together 3 mandates. This was done by the League of Nations, which was formed after World War II to try to make sure that nothing like the World War ever happened again. They didn't do a very good job. But what they did was they made these 3 mandates. There were 3 of them. There was one for Lebanon, there was one for Syria, and there was one for what is now known, or what was then known as Palestine. The French had the mandates for Lebanon and Syria. They were to guard over that area until the people could govern themselves. And the British were to guard over the area of Palestine until at what point they could figure out a way that those people could govern themselves and make real countries. The Lebanese mandate was solved in 1920, and it was the formation of Greater Lebanon. The Syrian mandate was settled in 1930 with the formation of the Syrian Republic. The British received the Palestinian mandate with a final expiration date, May 15, 1948. That date will become very, very, obvious in a minute. There's one difference between the Lebanon mandate, besides the fact that it's French or British, but the Lebanon mandate, the Syrian mandate, and the Palestinian mandate. There's one difference: presence of the Jews. That is the only difference. 1920, Lebanon; 1930, Syria. All fixed up, all ready to go. They have their own countries, rule yourselves, we're moving on. When the League of Nations dissolved in 1946, this issue was still open. Okay, and the newly formed United Nations actually took it up and made it a UN mandate as well. UN developed a partition plan at that particular point, 1946, that divided the way that Palestine was going to be worked out between the Jews and the Arabs, and making Jewish and Arab states. They mapped it out and said this is what it's going to be. Now understand that the population, since this first began back when the League of Nations first set out this mandate, the population of the Jews at that point had exploded. It wasn't, just these little tiny small villages. Jews have been coming back for years, and they've been paying exorbitant prices for this useless property in Israel paying the Arabs for this Israel, or this land, and occupying the land. They didn't steal anything. They came back and they had to pay for everything that they had. So don't let anybody fool you. Okay, that's exactly what took place. Now, so here we have this Palestinian land. This is it. Okay, so when the United Nations partitioned this is what they suggested. Yeah. Okay, so this little green part right here, this is what they laid out for the Jews. That's the part that they said, this is going to be what the Jews get. This is the partition that was laid out by the mandate from the United Nations. And the stateless Jews, at this point, they agreed. They said, yes, we'll gladly take this. This is cool. And this is basically where they live. This is the parts of Israel that they went and purchased property from the Arabs. This is where they already owned land. And they said, yes, we will gladly accept this partition, except it was rejected by the Arabs. No, it happened. This continued for a couple of years, and on May the 14th, 1948, one day before the mandate for Palestine expired, with absolutely no possibility of there being an agreement, Israel proclaimed itself a country, and they accepted this right here. That's the land that they said. We claimed it. That's the UN mandate for us. We're claiming that, and we're a country. The very next day, the Arabs went forward. Now we have the United States and 11 other countries in the world immediately recognized this, including, of all places, Iran. The Arab League immediately launched a war, and miraculously and decidedly, against overwhelming odds, Israel won. Israel won this war with the help of God. I mean, it was miraculous. There's no way this ragtag group of Jews who had not been a country, they couldn't have won this war by themselves, and yet they won this war. And what happened is that when Israel signed armistice with the countries that were involved, with Egypt, with Jordan, with Syria, they picked up a little bit of land. This is the armistice agreement in 1949. Now, it doesn't look a whole lot different, but you can see that this place up here is no longer there, that this large piece that was down here that wasn't theirs is now theirs, and this part was small. And this was part of the agreement. After Israel won a war, everybody agreed to it. Israel said, yes, we will take that, and leave us alone, won't be any problem, right? If you ever hear people talk about the two-state solution, this is it. This is what everybody wants Israel to go back to. This piece of land right here. We would be happy with the two-state solution, say the Arabs. Let's go back to the two-state solution. We've been working on the two-state solution since 1949. Let's have peace. We'll stay here. You stay there. Everything is going to be wonderful. Skip ahead a war. We're going to pass this one up. And a great deal of Palestinian unrest in this land to 1967. In 1967, Egypt was amassing tanks at Israel's southern border. Down here, this is Egypt. They were amassing tanks, and they shut down the Strait of Tiran, which is how all of Israel's shipping was getting to Israel. The containers and stuff that they were importing from the rest of the world, that's how they were getting there, and Egypt had shut it down. So Israel launched a preemptive strike, believing fully, after that many, almost 18 years worth of terror and attacks, that they were fixing to get it again, and they launched a preemptive strike. And in 6 days, even though Jordan joined them and Syria joined them, in 6 days, Israel also won a miraculous and overwhelming victory. The United Nations resolution said after this that, peace could be attained if all parties agreed to a pre-1967 boundaries and an end to hostilities. I want you to make sure that you see that I'm making air quotes around the end of hostility. Because what had taken place in 1967 is, this place was now theirs, this place was now theirs, and all of this was now theirs, Israel's. And they took the Golan Heights up here. So they got all of that in the war. I mean, a massive victory that should not have been able to take place. But it did. So the United States resolution came and said, peace can be attained if you go back to these borders, even though now you've got all this other stuff. If you go back to these borders, end of hostilities, we can have peace in the region. Guess who agreed to it? Israel agreed to it. Okay, we'll do that. End of hostilities, right? No end of hostilities. And then we fast forward to 1993. I'm sure some of you guys remember the Oslo Accords, where again, Israel agreed to these borders, said yes. And our friends that just attacked southern Israel, who had come into existence in 1987, were like, no. No, we don't want just that. We want all of it. They started a terror campaign. That's what they're known for, terror campaigns, where they're blowing themselves up on buses in Jerusalem, where they were blowing themselves up on buses in all of these different towns. They were walking into shops and into restaurants and into clubs with a jacket on and blowing themselves up, screaming, Allah Akbar. God is great. Our God is great. Their God is bad news. Always is. There's never been an end to the hostilities. Never been an end to these hostilities. Suicide attacks, shootings, stabbings, missiles. That's why peace has never happened. Okay, this is a one-sided argument that you will not hear about it being a one-sided argument. You will always hear that it's been Israel's fault all along, and it's their aggression that's causing this to take place. And those that claim that the Palestinian cause, those that claim it, that that's what they're doing, they don't really want peace with Israel. They've rejected it time after time after time after time. They want all of Free Israel, Palestine. It's even in their charters. When you read the charter of Hamas, it doesn't say we want peace with Israel, it says we want Israel. The latest attacks that just took place in southern Israel make a two-state solution a moot point. It's not going to happen. But they thought it was never going to happen. Now Israel, it's not going to ever happen. It's not going to take place. They're not going to have peace. They're not going to have peace until the false peace of the Antichrist comes. There will not be a two-state solution before we see the Antichrist. Now you're going to see some optics, some things taking place, the coming ground invasion of Israel into Gaza. You're going to see pictures and things that are going to disturb you. And this is all going to be used by the enemy, by Satan and his demonic forces to try to blame shift. Then terrorists are going to try to take eyes off themselves, the bad guy. Anybody not think they're the bad guy? Well, let's keep listening, okay? And they're going to try to shift it towards Israel. And first of all, Israel has to put a stop to this cycle. This cycle has been going on for years. Terrorist attacks, Israel blows some stuff up, everybody's quiet. Terrorist attacks, Israel blows some stuff up, everybody's quiet. This cycle is ridiculous. It has went on way longer than it needed to. But listen, urban warfare is horrible. Urban warfare always is horrible. It's the worst kind of warfare. It is what an army wants the very least to ever have to do is to go into an urban situation, especially one like Gaza, and to try to root out an enemy. Very, very difficult, very, very bad. And all the demonic forces in the world are going to try to make it look like Israel is the one who was the cause of the attack in the first place and who is causing the humanitarian crisis that's going to be in Gaza. I'm not trying to tell you that there will not be a humanitarian crisis. There absolutely will be a humanitarian crisis in Gaza. But any support for what Hamas did can only be demonic. So those people who were saying that this, they deserved it, or they had it coming, or anything, that's demonic. It is nothing short of it. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1 says this, "Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen." The intent is to take guys from Hamas as the bad guys and place them on Israel. We can see that evidence. We can see that evidence even though the real war is unseen. That first scripture I read, our battle is not against flesh and blood. It is against principalities. It is against the forces of evil in heavenly places. It is against Satan and his hordes. It's not against the Gazan citizens. Israel's fight is not against the Gazan citizens. It's against Hamas, and they need to be eliminated. According to the United Nations and the World Bank, the Gaza Strip is the most densely populated and one of the poorest places on earth. Okay? This is supposedly all because of Israel's occupation and the blockade of the Gaza border. Has anybody heard that? Israel's occupation to the occupied territory. Anybody heard that? And that this problem that exists in Gaza is because of Israel's 16-year blockade of their borders. Anybody heard that? Okay, let's look at the facts. Let's really look at what's going on. And I'm not trying to convince you that there isn't poverty in Gaza. Okay, there is. I'm not trying to convince you that there are not issues in Gaza, that these people are put down. I'm not trying to convince you of anything like that. And I'm not trying to convince you that most of the citizens of Gaza are blameless in this, because they really, really are. And when we see the signs that say "Free Gaza," I don't disagree. I'm just different in who I think they need to be freed from. I believe they need to be freed from the satanic forces of their Hamas overlords. That's what I think they need to be freed from. According to the World Bank, Gaza's GDP is $25.5 billion per year. That's not including the $600 million every year that they receive in foreign humanitarian aid. And it's also not including all of the money that Iran funnels to them into the Hamas organization to build and perpetrate terror against Israel. This is just their straight up GDP. Okay? That GDP amounts, everybody know what GDP is? Which is gross domestic product. Okay. And that amounts to $12,975 per capita. That means that each Gazan citizen, if that money were distributed equally above that, everybody would get $12,795. You know what's interesting about that GDP? It's higher than China. It's higher than India. Okay? It's higher than Mexico. It's higher than Brazil. Do you know it's $225 lower than where we sit right now? Now I look out my window, and I know a lot of Costa Ricans. And I look out my window, and you know what? They only make $225 a year per capita more than people in Gaza. And it's not terrible. You see, if all that money were to be put to the use that it was intended to, with citizens of Gaza, it wouldn't be cake and caviar, but it wouldn't be what it is. Okay, it would not be what it is. And that fault lies solely with Hamas. They have governed Gaza since 2007. Now, Gaza's got 21 miles of Mediterranean beachfront. They have one of the largest gas deposits off of their coast seen anywhere in the Mediterranean. Had all of this time the Palestinians that are for the global Palestinian cause put to good use their coastline and the money that they have been given to develop their gas, this is one of the richest places on the planet. Now, let me pose this to you. You're going to hear a whole bunch of this. Now, if Gaza was an occupied territory, by Israel especially, would you see armed militant gunmen riding in cars and buggies and trucks down the street, shooting AK-47s into the air? Would you see that? Would there exist the largest underground terror network and military infrastructure in the entire world? Would that exist if Israel was an occupier? would that take place? Would Hamas have been able to recently launch the attack that they did in southern Israel, or be able to hide and use more than 5,000 rockets in this latest attack towards Israel? Would they have been able to hide that if Israel was an occupier? I don't think so. I do not think so. Especially knowing the IDF, like I know the IDF. Secondly, this is a picture of the Gaza Strip. There are four entrances into the Gaza Strip. Two are in Israel, two are in Egypt. There are two borders here, one with Israel and one with Egypt. No one ever suggests that Egypt is holding Gaza hostage, that Egypt is blockading Gaza and causing their issues. No one ever suggests that that's taking place. But listen, Gaza doesn't want Hamas in their territory. They don't want them there. They're an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood, which, if you remember a number of years back, gave Egypt a big run for their money when they elected a Muslim Brotherhood president in Mohammed Morsi. Or did they try to get rid of him really fast? They don't want them there. They don't want Hamas there. Hamas is blocking Gazans getting out of northern Gaza. They are also praising Egypt for not opening their border. They're telling Israel, you're terrible. You don't let anybody cross the border. Egypt, you guys are great. Don't let anybody through. Don't do it. I mean, it's just the idiocy of it. It just doesn't make sense to me that people are going to believe it. Can you imagine that taking place and people still blaming Israel? Now, that's not sufficient. Let's compare some border statistics. Okay? 36% of all the imports into Gaza come from Egypt. 36%. 64% come from Israel. Most of the stuff from Egypt is things that Gaza has to buy to rebuild. Concrete, that Egypt's making a big profit on. Most of what goes through Israel is humanitarian aid and the stuff that the Gazans really need. Food, gas, fuel oil, those kinds of things. Those are 800 truckloads per month of goods from Gaza go to Israel. Egypt only allows scrap metal and used batteries for recycling into Egypt. Egypt, how many work permits do you think are allowed to go through Egypt? Almost zero. Israel's allowing, when this thing started, up to 20,000 people, 20,000 Gazans to come into Israel every day to work and make a good wage, and to take that money back home. Do you know that's almost 20% of Gaza's GDP? Comes from Israel, comes from working in Israel. And yet, they're bullies, they're terrible. See, because both of the populations in Gaza and in Egypt are Arab, you're never going to hear about them being occupiers or horrible people that have closed off the borders. But you're going to hear all about that as this bombardment and this ground offensive starts, that this is all Israel's fault. That's what you do learn the facts. And you're going to hear people talking about diplomacy. Okay? They've been doing that since 2005, when Israel pulled all of their military and all of their settlers and relocated all of their settlers out of Gaza and left it alone. It's like, you got all these natural resources, all this stuff, thank you very much, have a nice day. We don't need the headache. They've been self-governed ever since. A lot can be said for in a name. And when people call themselves things like the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade, or how about the Qassam Brigade? Well, that is named after a guy in original Palestine who was going around killing all kinds of people, and he was finally eliminated and martyred by the British before Israel ever existed. And this is who they are celebrating and saying, we're naming ourselves after that guy because he's such a role model. The names that they call, that doesn't sound like anybody there is interested in diplomacy. They don't want to talk. They don't want to do anything. I mean, can you imagine if I was known as Jihadi Jeff? You might think I have a different message, right? enough history, let's get to prophecy. Now, last week I showed you a graph of the prophesied Psalms 83 war last week. I'd like to put that back up with some updates. All right, so this is our, and I fixed the radio thing on the graph. So once again, these are people groups that are mentioned in Psalms 83 with their modern day equivalents. All the yellow arrows that you see up here, these are the people groups that are currently engaged fully or partially. Okay, there's one of the two. The green arrow represents the Arabian Peninsula, which is the Houthi rebels. Probably if you can keep going. And they've already promised that as soon as Israel invades Gaza in the ground, they're going to enter the fray. Okay, so that's already done. The wild card here is Jordan. You see all my little white arrows right there. That's the wild card in this particular thing. And if you take a look at the last couple of days' news coming out of Jordan, you're going to see that there are currently mass demonstrations about this, about what is going on in Gaza. And they're not on Israel's side. In fact, the Jordanian police had to stop a mob from breaking down the fence between Jordan and the West Bank just 2 days ago. Okay. None of these people are chanting death to Hamas. Okay, they are chanting something completely different. So, if you understand the population of Jordan, the Hashemite kingdom that is in charge, King Abdullah II, they're a very small minority that have been having problems for a long, long time keeping the population in check. There are more than 2 million Palestinian refugees, which is a lot of the population, in Jordan. And the United States F-15 fighters just landed in Jordan as a support group for Israel. Now, don't get me wrong, Jordan probably doesn't want to do that, but they have to be able to continue to get the massive funding that is coming to them from the United States. But let me ask you, how's that going to come over with the population? When they're rioting in the streets, trying to break down the border fence with the West Bank to join the fray, and all of a sudden they've got United States jets on their soil, do you think King Abdullah is going to be a popular dude? I don't. And I've been wondering for a long time, as long as I've been studying this, I've been wondering, how does this west-leaning Jordan end up on this list? How does it end up on this list? Now, I don't know what's going to happen. I'm not saying that I have some eye in the sky that's going to say that something's going to happen in Jordan. And it's not just because we've got the Psalms 83 prophecy. It's because we also have all of these that tell us that Israel will destroy and occupy Jordan and destroy and level Amman, which is the capital. So it's not just a thing in Psalms 83 where Jordan is casually mentioned. It is throughout Scripture, throughout prophetic Scripture, we know that that's going to take place. All these passages, they tell of the end time destruction is coming. It is the Word of God, so I know that it will take place. Lastly, for the day, we're going to go to Isaiah. See, Damascus will cease from being a city. It shall be a ruinous heap. The cities of Aor are forsaken. They shall be for flocks which shall lie down, and no one shall make them afraid. The fortress also shall cease from Ephraim, and the kingdom from Damascus, and the remnant of Aram. They shall be as the glory of the sons of Israel, says the Lord of hosts. Damascus is going to be leveled. It's never going to be lived in again. Something is going to destroy Damascus that keeps it from ever having a population in it again until the millennial kingdom. And we also see that it shall be the glory of the sons of Israel. Israel will occupy it. Israel's going to take it. It's going to be Israel doing this. They're going to take care of it for the glory of the sons of Israel. No one is exactly sure who this prophecy will be. But it certainly looks like it's going to be soon. It certainly looks like it. Last week, on October the 9th, this last week, like Sunday's week, it's reported that Hezbollah leadership was warned that if Hezbollah enters this conflict, that the IDF will annihilate Damascus and will particularly target Ashur-dan-Sargon. It's the IDF warning Hezbollah that that's what they're going to do if they enter the war. You know, I don't know if you see like the words from prophecy jumping out into modern times, but I certainly do. I certainly do. Genesis chapter 15. God promised that Israel would occupy the land that he had promised to Abraham. It's not happened yet. It's never happened yet. Will it happen tomorrow? I don't know. Next week, next month, 2024? I don't know when it will happen. But again, because it tells us in God's word that it will happen, it will happen. I think it's going to happen soon. This war is looking more and more like we will see the perfect fulfillment of all of these prophecies that we've talked about this morning. Just a little bit of escalation. Just a few slight things. Nothing out of the ordinary, nothing that probably would even surprise any of us at this point have to happen for all of this to come to pass. And if you look at the current, this is God's promise. Okay? That's God's promise. Basically, that goes here, here's the Dead Sea. This would loop around down there, come across here, and go up like this. So a bunch of Jordan would be included, a bunch of Syria would be included. It goes all the way up to right there. For that to take place, for that to be true, for Israel to occupy their land in full, these prophecies will need to come true. They will need to happen just as they were written. The interesting thing to me is that, you know, as a Christian, it's hard to say I'm excited because it's horrible, and I don't want to see people die. I hate it. I hate that we've already seen some of the things I've seen. It's been devastating. But I also know that if God fulfills his promises to them, there are promises for us in his word. And if those promises, prophetic promises, are fulfilled, prophetic promises for each of us that are sitting in this room are also going to be fulfilled. At the end of Psalms 83, we read these words. Fill their faces with shame, that they may seek your name, O Lord. Let them be confounded and troubled forever. Yes, let them be put to shame and perish, that they may know that you, whose name alone is the Lord, are the most high over all the earth. And I do believe we'll see miraculous victories, just like 1948, just like 1967. I believe that we're going to see that in the very near future. But the whole reason for this is to show prophecy, yes, but also do not buy into the false narratives. They're going to be out there. The rumor mill is going to be running amok. And we've already seen it begin. Don't buy into the false narratives. You know, we're not going to be able to change the mind of people who have already adopted this firm stance that they're against Israel, because it doesn't come from them. It comes from the principalities and the powers. Our struggle is not against flesh and blood. You will not be able to convince people who are unconvincible, but you will be able to talk a few people off the ledge because you know what the real story is. You know what the real facts are. And you'll be able to sway some people into not thinking that this is what it's going to be portrayed as in media. The same, we know that Satan's deception is too much for some people. And if you could just bowl over them with information. You could show them all the facts in the entire world, and it's not going to make any difference. They have already taken a knee to the wrong person, and that's not going to change. But God will change the minds of all people who support Israel. And this is that. In the meantime, for those who have a willing ear to hear, let them hear the truth. Let them hear the real facts of what's going on. We can defend God's chosen nation, Israel, and we can certainly pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Heavenly Father,